Why validate? Why indeed? A lot of people who write files and read files don't stop to validate that file. They process what they process. If they encounter an error, they throw an error and they tell the user that they're out of luck. But there are some good and abiding reasons to validate PDF, and I want to introduce to you a couple of thoughts very quickly before the technical experts take over about the rationale as I see it from the end user point of view. I want to remind everybody what users expect from PDF, and these things are a little different from what they expect of other things like Microsoft Word files or HTML or text or databases or anything else like that. PDF is a number of unique features in the minds of the user, and it's very important when one's considering the significance of validation to consider those unique features. First and foremost, faithful reproduction of the author's intent. End users trust PDF because once they make that PDF, it looks pretty much to them just like the file that they authored it from, just like the scan that they produced it from, and so on. A physical page that prints just as it appears on the screen. They want to have reproducibility in print compared to what they're looking at on their screen. They want to be able to create a document from any source, electronic source, anything that can print, or from a piece of paper. They believe, and users believe, that PDF files are very difficult to change. It's fundamental, actually, to the acceptance of PDF is the idea, and I see this real estate agents and mortgage people and banks all the time, that once they've PDF'd a document and sent it from A to B, that person on the other end won't be able to change it. Now, every single person in this room knows that that's complete falsehood, and nonetheless, the significance of that belief on the part of the end users is a major feature of the attractiveness of PDF as a solution to business problems. It should be deployable to all in principle. That's what end users have gotten used to, the idea that it doesn't matter what kind of computer that they're using, they can still read that PDF file. And from my point of view, the feature that users expect that ties all this in together and in fact allows PDF to be legitimately considered as an electronic replacement for a piece of paper is interoperability. And that's really the fundamental rationale behind the need to pay attention to validation. So how do we validate today? Well, most of you are painfully aware of the fact that when you go ahead and write a piece of software that makes a PDF file, your first step is Adobe Reader. Crack it open, does this thing work? Or at least the first PDF files you ever made. You probably tested them that way. Now you perhaps have other methods, but at the end of the day, you're well aware that end users around the world use Adobe Reader to validate your files. And so at the very least, you need to know what your files are going to do in that context. There are many problems, of course, with this model. Number one, Adobe doesn't own PDF anymore. That's a good reason not to use an Adobe implementation to validate your files. Reader is a piece of software, and of course it's got all kinds of Adobe proprietary stuff under the hood, as it should do, as everybody's software should do. But it's software, it's not a specification. It's not something that one can actually go ahead and write to from that point of view. Reader, as everybody knows, also does a tremendous amount of work. Some have referred to it as backflips or other kinds of gymnastics to rescue files, rescue PDF files that were created in bizarre fashions that may or may not be particularly legitimate under one or another version of the PDF reference. And Reader allows one, in fact, it recovers for a lot of bad PDFs. And that's hard to understand as a validation model. How can we play archive if we can't validate rendering? This is a question that occurred to me a while ago, and it's probably a question that nobody even wants to look at. But we have this thing called PDFA, and that's great. But if we don't yet have a rendering model for it, or a rendering validation model for it, nothing that everybody agrees to, it's an interesting question as to what does it mean to say that we've got an archive document that we actually can't validate that rendering. The results, interoperability suffers. If a file works in Reader but doesn't work in something else, there are all kinds of situations where the ability to exchange and interleave documents can encounter problems. And of course, because interoperability suffers, the perception of PDF as a reliable means of replacing paper is diminished, and that's bad for everybody in this room. It's bad for business. So a personal view of how we should validate PDF, and I emphasize this as a personal view. It's something I've spent a little bit of time thinking about and conversing with others about. And the thoughts that I have are, number one, that one way or another we should be covering all of 32,000. There are many, many good reasons to develop implementations that don't use all the features in ISO 32000. In fact, there are probably very few implementations that actually do use all 32,000. That's a good legitimate objective for a validator, though, which is, of course, not necessarily a user deployed piece of software. We should validate, and it's implied, of course, in covering all of 32,000, but I believe we should validate each object type referenced in 32,000. Yes, that might mean validating a JPEG. Assurance of certain quality levels is really the point of going about this validation, so that users and software that exchange information, exchange files, have the facility to understand that what they're going to receive is something that's at a certain level of quality. In my view, a validator, I imagine the validator in my mind's eye would be out there. It would be something deployable within products. Would also be a standalone resource so that end users, I'm one of them, would be able to take a look at my PDF file that's giving me a headache and bounce it off of something out there. Tell me about this file. What's wrong with this file? What's the nature of the complaint that I need to deliver to the developer of this file, and so on. A validator, it seems to me, should be platform independent to facilitate the ability to deploy within multiple products or as a standalone resource. A common programming language for it, given platform independence, we're probably going to be looking at C, Java perhaps. I should be stepping on close to that. Error reporting, crucial, and something that oftentimes gets left, I think, doesn't get necessarily the highest priority. But of course, a validator should be able to report its results in a way that both is meaningful to end users and, of course, useful to developers. A validator should include, and I'm not quite sure how a piece of software does arbitration or means of arbitration, but a validator should have some sort of liaison to the committee that organizes ISO 32000 now that Adobe is no longer responsible for the document. And if you ask me, I would say there should be one validator to rule them all, one validator to bind them, and I won't give you the rest of the quote. one validator owned by no one, used by everyone. And this is the premier way, it seems to me, of achieving the objective of maximizing interoperability. I'll leave it up to these guys. Thank you very much, and looking forward to seeing these next presentations.